All right, welcome to the My Church internet broadcast. This is Pastor Sonny Primo coming to you live from Fort Worth, Texas. Now, I want to thank y'all for joining me today. We're going to pick up on our study of God's plan and purpose for Israel. We left off reading 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 12. We're going to pick up right there where we left off. We'll read that again just to get you all familiar with it, in case time has some time has passed since our last session. All right, this will be session 26, by the way. All right, here we go. 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 12. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Behold, I am bringing such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, that whosoever heareth of it, both his ears shall tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, and the plummet of the house of Ahab, and I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. And I will forsake the remnant of mine inheritance, and deliver them into the hand of their enemies, and they shall become a prey and a spoil to all their enemies, because they have done that which was evil in my sight, and have provoked me to anger, since the day their fathers came forth out of Egypt, even unto this day. Now, as verse 12 says, in view of that, God brought evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, as he had on Samaria. Now, you can see that Judah was worthy of the fifth cycle of judgment at this point, and God said he would bring it. However, the fifth cycle did not come immediately. When Manasseh died, his son Amon continued the evil, but was killed by his servants after 2 years. Next, Josiah reigned for 31 years and did what was right in the sight of the Lord. However, that was not enough to keep the fifth cycle from coming upon the southern kingdom. Now, verse 13 mentions the plummet of the house of Ahab, indicating that Manasseh was to the southern kingdom what Ahab was to the northern kingdom. Ahab's abominations defiled the northern kingdom and made Israel ready for the next cycle, just as Manasseh's abominations defiled the southern kingdom and made it ready for Judah's next cycle. Josiah brought in period that turned things around for Judah, but that was not enough to change the evil God would bring upon Jerusalem and Judah. We can see this very statement made in 2 Kings 23. Now, the chapter begins by listing the great works of Josiah and giving him credit for following the Lord. All right? So look at verse 1. 2 Kings chapter 23. And the king sent, and they gathered unto him all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets and all the people, both small and great. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant which was found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by a pillar, and made a covenant before the Lord, to walk after the Lord, and to keep commandments. And to keep his commandments, and his testimonies, and his statutes, with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of the covenant that were written in this book. And all the people stood, to the covenant. And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priest of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, and for all the host of heaven. And he burned them without Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. And he brake down the houses of the Sodomites. There were that were by the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the grove, and the altars that were on top of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made. In the two courts of the house of the Lord did the king beat down and break them down from thence, and cast the dust of them into the brook Kidron. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the mount of corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel had builded for Ashtaroth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for the Shemash, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel, and the high place which Jerusalem the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, both that altar and the high place he broke down, and burned the high place, and stamped it small to powder, and burned the grove. Now, we're leaving a lot out here, but as you get down into the chapter, after reviewing all that Josiah did, take a look at verse 26. Notwithstanding, the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his great wrath, wherewith his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations that Manasseh had provoked him withal. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. I will cast off this city, Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. The actual arrival of the fifth cycle on the southern kingdom is detailed in 2 Kings chapter 24. We can look at 24 verse 1. It says, in his days Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by the servants, the prophets. Surely, at the commandment of the Lord, came this up upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Which the Lord would not pardon, shows that there was no recourse except to bring about the next cycle of judgment. When Babylon came against Judah, a number of sieges took place, and the people were carried away captive in waves. We can see that in 2 Kings chapter 25. Verse 1, it says, and it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between two walls, which is by the king's pardon. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about. And the king went the way toward the plain, and the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king, and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from him. So they took the king, and brought him up to the king of Babylon in Riblah. And they gave judgment upon him, and they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters and brass, and carried him to Babylon. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. And all the army of the Chaldees that were with the captain of the guard brake down the walls of Jerusalem round about. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. And the king of Babylon smote them and slew them at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land. Remember Leviticus 26:34. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbath as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbath as long as it lieth desolate. It shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. Now the first goal of the fifth cycle of judgment was to restore the land's Sabbath. This was accomplished in part 1 of the fifth cycle. Now, as we're about to discover that this fifth cycle is broken into parts, Jeremiah was given the time concerning this first part, which was connected to the Sabbath. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verse 20. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbath. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. Do you know how long that is? 70 years. Jeremiah prophesied during the Babylonian invasions and was given to understand that the first part of the fifth cycle would run 70 years. This is the marker for the fifth cycle of judgment. However, the fifth cycle was not over when the 70 years were fulfilled. Jeremiah made it clear that when the first part was over, other parts would follow. He was not given the timetable, which was reserved for Daniel. Just as part 1 had a goal, restoring the Sabbath, each part has a goal. In Leviticus 26, we see the setup for the idea that there would be more than just 70 years that Jerusalem predicted. Leviticus 26 verse 34. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. And upon them that are left alive of you, this is verse 36, I will send a faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase them, and they shall flee, as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth. And they shall fall one upon another, as it were before a sword, when none pursueth. And ye shall have no power to stand before your enemies, and ye shall perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, and also in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. Now, as you read through this passage, you see the pining away of the people that verse 39 indicates. And it lasts through one generation and on into the next. That in the iniquities of their fathers they shall they pine away with them. That indicates more will come. This is the issue that will be before us when we continue. Now, we can go to our timeline and fill in the first part of the fifth cycle. Remember that from the time of the divided kingdom of the second cycle, the cycles came on. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom at different times. You should have Cycles 1, 100-year period of mercy. Cycle 2, cycle 3, cycle 4, and now cycle 5 is captive out of the land. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 18 through 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verse 21 on your timeline. And right above that, above it, right, 70 years. Because we have the judges, David and Solomon, Elijah, Elisha, then the evil kings, and then 70 years. Now, we will continue to fill in our timeline as we divide the fifth cycle into its different parts. Now, when you read Leviticus 26, you will notice that the verses given regarding the fifth cycle far exceed that of any other cycle. In fact, there are more fifth cycle verses than for all the previous cycles put together. However, it isn't just that. As you read through the verses of the fifth cycle in Leviticus 26, you will find that more is described than actually took place in the 70 years that Jeremiah described. The additional times are what we want to get a handle on, so that we can understand the scope of the fifth cycle. Now let's go back and look at Leviticus 26 to read the remainder of the chapter. Chapter 26, verse 40. If they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass, which they trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and I also have walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then accept of the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. The land also shall be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lieth desolate without them. And they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away. Neither will I abhor them to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God, but I will, for their sakes, remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. Now that last phrase is an indicator of God's Jehovah name as it pertains to the timelessness factor, in that God will remember his covenant, and time is not an issue for God. He is faithful to perform. Oh, goodness. He is faithful to perform all he has spoken. This in Leviticus 26 is what Daniel understood when he asked God for a time schedule regarding what would follow the 70-year captivity. Daniel was one of those carried away captive by Babylon, and he knew that Jeremiah had written about the 70 years. However, Daniel also knew that the 7 years would not constitute the end of what would come upon the nation. Now we need to understand what Daniel understood. Leviticus 26 verses 40 through 45 was written to describe a time in which Israel would be called upon to repent for her trespasses and living as though Jehovah was not her God. Acknowledge that he has treated Israel as though she was not composed of his people. Humble herself and accept the punishment of her iniquity. Now as we study through, you will see that this actually came to pass with the ministry of John the Baptist. However, this passage is not prophetic, in that it looks forward to a time when the nation will be faced with this ultimate decision once again. And in that sense, it is a sort of a marker for future events. In Leviticus 26, we learned the land will have Sabbaths once again. that the pining away will take place over time, and Israel will be faced with her iniquity and have an opportunity to confess what she had done. Now we're talking here about a time in which God would put his Jehovahness into effect for a nation, which we saw by the phrase, I am the Lord, in verse 45. After we go through the book of Daniel, you will see that this is exactly what was happening in the period of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the first 8 chapters of the book of Acts. This was the period of the first advent of Jesus Christ, which we refer to as the days of the Messiah, in which the nation was confronted with the issues of Leviticus 26, verses 40 through 45. Now you may be thinking, boy, that's a long time. Yes, you're right. One more issue before we go to the writings of Daniel. Those who wrote the books from Isaiah through Malachi were fifth cycle prophets. Doctrinally, Daniel is the center or hub of all the information contained in the rest of these books. A diagram of it would look something like this. All right, you got Daniel in the middle, and you put a cross down the middle with a circle around it. Then on the north side you'd have Ezekiel, to the east side you'd have Jeremiah, to the south side you'd have minor prophets, and to the west side you'd have Isaiah. Everything written by the prophets of the books from Isaiah through Malachi touches on what Daniel, as the hub of the wheel, wrote. The fifth cycle prophets were not given a time schedule by which to know when the events they described would occur. Daniel, however, was given the time schedule and a goal associated with each division of the fifth cycle. Just as Leviticus 26 provides the history of Israel in a nutshell, the book of Daniel provides a summary of the fifth cycle of judgment. Daniel was given five revelations that all concern the fifth cycle. In fact, they were given in such a way that each succeeding revelation was based on the one preceding it. And by the time you get through all 5 revelations, much detail has been provided concerning the fifth cycle and its individual parts. As a foundation to our work in Daniel, we must get our bearings about the contents of the books of Isaiah through Malachi. In the writings of these fifth cycle prophets, God dealt with 7 major doctrinal issues that comprise the fifth cycle of judgment. Not all of these prophets wrote regarding all 7 issues, but every prophet wrote about at least one, if not more, of the major doctrinal issues. The major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, wrote regarding all 7. The minor prophets provided additional detail. Now, when we come back, we'll look at the 7 doctrinal issues of the prophets. But for now, we're going to have to pause because I'm out of time for this session. All right, this is Pastor Sonny. I want to thank you all for joining me. I've had a wonderful time. We're going to pick this up right where we left off when we come back in the next session. All right, may God bless you.